During the late 19th and early 20th century, Cuba and America had different views of each other. America viewed Cuba as though they were the strong nation looking over a malnourished nation in need. We drew a hand dropping supplies from the sky to represent the Americans helping out Cuba during their fight against Spain. However, in deeper context, it shows how the Americans felt that they were basically Cuba's god, and that Cuba relied on them. This means that America felt in a position of power, and that there was a feeling of righteousness because of how the Americans helped to make many improvements such as sanitation and advancements medically. The bedraggled Cuban soldier holding a knife in comparison to the Spanish soldier holding a gun strikes this point even further. The American thought bubble of the British flag represented that the Americans sympathized with the Cubans in their fight for independence and viewed the Spanish control of Cuba in the same light as when Britain oppressed them in their colonial times. The Cubans definitely had a different view though. We drew the Spanish flag handing the Cuban flag to an American flag. This symbolizes how the Cubans felt. At first, they were happy at receiving help from the American, but eventually, it was just like the Spanish handing over Cuba to the Americans. America put so much influence over Cuba that it wasn't like Cuba being free, but rather Cuba being shipped to a new owner. Nothing much changed, but for who was at power. The representation of both countries with crowns showed that the Cubans seemed to view the Americans and Spanish in the same light. The other two aspects of the Cuban view were the Cuban Constitution and the chained improvements. The Cuban Constitution with the connected part underneath represents the oppression that the Cubans associated with the Platt Amendment that the Americans forced the Cubans to incorporate in their constitution. Finally, the chained hospitals showed that while the Cubans recognized the improvements made by the Americans, they also realized that it came with the price of less self-government and freedom.